The happiest wives in America are religious conservatives with conservative gender values. Nobody expected this. And I'm surprised the New York Times was willing to print it, to be honest. So this was amazing. This was sort of the trigger for writing the book. I said, we need to get this out. Because there's been so many attacks on men, and as you know, the primary target is evangelical Christian men. Yeah. They're often seen as like exhibit A of men who are toxic, oppressive, patriarchal, and so on, because they believe in some sort of authority in the home or headship, to use a biblical term. And so they're often targeted as being particularly toxic. And it wasn't hard at all to find examples, to introduce that part of the book. Lots and lots of examples of people saying, both Christian and secular, saying that if you believe in any form of headship, if you believe in complementarianism, you will be abusive. It silences women. It oppresses women. It's so common. And the sociologists, there were some of them who said, well, wait a minute, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? Is there any evidence for these charges? And so over the past several years, there have been sociologists who decided, well, let's do some studies. The largest one, and the one that I rely on the most, I have about a dozen different sociologists, but the one I rely on the most is Brad Wilcox, who's at the University of Virginia. He's considered like maybe the top marriage sociologist in the country. And he did a study in which he found that it's quite a large study. It fills a whole book. It's not just an academic paper. And what he found was that evangelical Christian men who attend church regularly, in other words, they're actually committed, they're actually living it out, test out as being the most loving to their wives. They spend the most time with their wives. Their wives repeat. They interview the wives separately, which is important. The women report feeling loved and appreciated at higher rates than other women. These men are more involved with their kids in terms of shared activities like sports or church youth group. They're more involved in discipline, like setting screen time, putting limits on bedtime, and so on. They also have the lowest rate of divorce of any group in America, and they have the lowest rate of domestic violence of any group in America. And not even Christians know this. I tell this to Christian audiences, and they kind of sit back and say, what? We have no idea that Christian men are testing out so well. And objective empirical research. In other words, Brad Wilcox is not even an evangelical himself. He's Catholic. So it's not like he has a dog in this fight. He just, with his own, objective research, found that evangelical Protestant, he makes a point, evangelical Protestant men test out as the most loving fathers, the most loving husbands, the lowest rates of divorce and domestic violence. In fact, let me give you a quote, because I have some notes here, and he was actually quoted in the New York Times. That tells you somewhat about how prominent he is, that he's, even though he's a conservative Catholic, he gets quoted in places like the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN and Slate and so on. Anyway, he was quoted in the New York Times, and he said this: "It turns out that the happiest of all wives in America are religious conservatives. Full 73% of wives who hold conservative gender values and attend religious services regularly with their husbands have high-quality marriages. The happiest wives in America are religious conservatives with conservative gender values. Nobody expected this." And I'm surprised the New York Times was willing to print it, to be honest. So this is amazing. This was sort of the trigger for writing the book. I said, we need to get this out. We need to encourage Christian men that they are actually doing a really good job compared to, the average American man. So that was the trigger. Yeah.
That's so good. And I want to have Bob put the graphic up so people can start pre-ordering the book. And It's called The Toxic War on Masculinity, How Christianity Reconciles the Sexes. It's going to drop toward the end of June, June 27th. So now's the time to go pre-order. And by pre-ordering, you'll also be helping Nancy, get the word out about the book, because the way Amazon kind of rigs the system is that it bases the algorithms based on the pre-orders. So if you like this kind of content, pre-ordering is a great way to support and send a clear message to publishers. Hey, we like this kind of content. We want more research that explores these important questions that other people aren't looking at. So that's a very practical way for you to help in that way. And so, Nancy, I guess what strikes me about this is that the messages about Christian men in particular, even by what I'm going to call the Christian media, often gives us the impression that Christian men are kind of the worst. They're the most abusive. They're the most oppressive toward their wives. But that doesn't sound like the picture that the research actually brings forward.
Yeah, you really have to go digging in the sociological literature to find this. And that's one reason I said, I've got to bring this out so that people can, be encouraged. And most of us have heard that Christians divorce at the same rate as the rest of the culture, right? What I've read, in fact, is that's one of the most common statistics that Christian leaders use. I think they're trying to motivate us or something with a negative message. Well, it turns out that there's an answer to that as well. The sociologists went back to the research and they separated out the men who attend church regularly, the ones who are really committed, over against nominal Christian men. In other words, people who, on a survey like that, would check the Baptist box, for example, but they actually don't go to church very often, if at all. The differences between these two groups is stunning. Nominal Christian men are less engaged with their children. They spend less time with them in shared activities or discipline. Their wives report the lowest level of happiness. They have the highest level of divorce, even higher than secular men. And the real stunner is they have the highest rate of domestic violence, even higher than secular men. So this is why our statistics get so skewed. If you combine those two groups, you're going to get a skewed statistic. Let me quote Brad Wilcox again. He's my go-to sociologist on this. He wrote about it in Christianity Today. And he wrote, "The most violent husbands in America are nominal evangelical Protestants who attend church infrequently or not at all." So apparently, a lot of men, will hang around the fringes of the Christian world, just enough to pick up language like headship and submission, but not get the biblical meaning of those terms. And instead, they inject meaning from the secular world, meaning from secular concepts of masculinity, of entitlement and dominance and so on. And they end up actually testing out as worse than secular men. So this is the challenge that faces us as Christians, because these guys are out there identifying as Christians, and yet they're living like secular men, and even worse, because they use, they cherry pick verses from the Bible to support what they're doing. So the challenge to the church is, how do we keep encouraging the men who do attend church regularly? Oh, and by the way, this is another cool quote from Brad Wilcox. He says, secular academics should, give up their prejudices against Christian men. I thought that was a good way of putting it. Secular researchers, sociologists, psychologists have often said what you just said, Krista, that Christian men are the worst in terms of being overbearing and tyrannical patriarchs and so on. He says we need to give up those prejudices. It's just not true. Christian men who attend church regularly test out the best. But the statistics are skewed because there's roughly an equal number of nominal Christian men, and they are they test out as worse than secular men. So that's what we're up against.